Hello everyone from France, where I'm probably asleep as you celebrate the 10th anniversary of the BC Citizens Assembly. I'm e-waking to participate this evening. I'm grateful and honored to be invited to share with you some thoughts from an academic perspective. I'm going to suggest a few points about the significance and impact of the CA and the referendums, despite the recommendations having fallen short of the referendum thresholds. My role, along with a few of my colleagues, was as a social scientific observer of the CA process and the referendums. With Richard Johnston, Ken Cardy, and Patrick Fournier, I studied how the public learned about the CA and its recommendations, how the campaign unfolded in 2005 from a voter's perspective, what the media did with this hot potato, and then what ingredients went into British Columbians' referendum voting decisions. Cardy, Fournier, and Campbell-Sharman, of course, also made a detailed study of CA members' evolution through the process. And even more broadly, a number of other political scientists, philosophers, and sociologists made important contributions by documenting the CA's work and the referendums. Together, we scholars tried to understand how novel this model of democratic decision-making really was and what it might mean for democratic reform more generally. My public opinion research team thinks that our study of voters' learning and decisions in the referendum made it abundantly clear that this was indeed something new and special for democracy. Probably the biggest lesson is that citizens seem willing to trust their fellow citizens to make important decisions, if a process like the CA process involves real learning, substantial and fair deliberation, and then transparent procedures for voting and decision-making in that body. It helps too if the process leads close to a consensus, as it did in the BC Citizens Assembly. We came to these conclusions by analyzing our survey data, where we found that, all else equal, voters were massively more supportive of the yes side if they knew what the CA was, had some idea what it did, and agreed that it was both expert and representative. And this was especially true of people that admitted they didn't know much about the proposed electoral system. That is, they had to learn about the CA to compensate for their own lack of information about the substance of the proposal. To put this another way, we just have to listen again to the sage words of Rafe Mayer from the 2005 campaign, before the vote. He said, "We should start with the thought that 160 of our fellow citizens, in an overwhelming favorable vote, and after the most careful examination of plenty of evidence, have made a recommendation. While that doesn't mean we have to agree with them, it does tell us that since none of us have gone through that exercise, we should give considerable weight to the recommendation made." Our public opinion analysis showed that a lot of voters thought this way, or took his advice. Well, that's what we learned from the 2005 referendum. And then we studied Ontario in 2007 and BC again in 2009. Of course, the results were different, with less than 40% support in those latter two referendums. It turns out that much of the difference in support for the yes side involved the same principle, but turned on its head. In the 2007 and 2009 referendums, voters knew a lot less about the CA. In BC, it seems they'd forgotten. And they didn't make the same connections about its expertise and representativeness to their voting decisions. So the Citizens' Assembly is no magic powder for democracy. It has to connect meaningfully to the core processes of our existing democracy. The crucial thing is that voters have to learn about the CA and in some sense let the CA decide for them. Then, perhaps if assemblies were entrenched in our democratic practices over time, this learning wouldn't be so necessary, and many people would trust a CA, and probably more so than their political representatives. Now, I have a personal research postscript to tell you about. I was in some way inspired by the CA report title, which you all recall was Making Every Vote Count. I have to say that it resonated with my own experience as a voter, and I wondered whether we could show in a rigorous way that voters themselves want their votes to count. Of course, you can't just ask people if they care whether their votes count. They'll all respond with a hearty yes. So with one of my master's students, Graham Hooper, I put together a referendum survey data with data on election results, local election results, to get a measurement for each voter of how likely that voter would be to ever get to vote for the person that would represent them, that is, vote for the winner of their local contest. We found clear evidence in both referendums that voters who supported parties that lost by big margins in their riding in the previous election, and who knew something about STV, were more likely to vote yes, much more likely in fact. And there was no opposite effect. That is, people who voted for parties that won by big margins were no more likely to vote no. We concluded that the CA got it exactly right to say that the most important thing an electoral system can do for already stable democracies like ours is to make every vote count. Now, in both of the studies I've mentioned, it's abundantly clear that in general, the more voters know about alternative systems, the more likely they are to support change. In 2005, we estimated that if all voters had just some awareness of the CA and of STV, we estimate the yes vote would have been close to 70%. In Ontario and in BC 2009, if all voters had known some of the facts about the CA and a few of the characteristics of the proposed system, the proposals would have passed their 50% thresholds. Now, obviously, informing voters is very hard, but it's the only chance for electoral reform now that we have the precedent from Canada and elsewhere that changes to an electoral system require referendum approval. Thanks for listening to my perspective on the impact of the CA and the referendums that occurred in BC and Ontario. I hope you all enjoy your evening and keep alive the memory of the CA and its path-breaking work.